Your fantasy football season is over. That just means it's time to play DFS. We're covering all of the wild card round showdown slates for DFS purposes here at Club Fantasy. This episode, we're going to be talking about the Steelers versus the Ravens, so stay tuned. One of these days, I'll actually try to write a script for those intros, so that way I get it the same on every single video. But until then, oh, Captain, my Captain, this is Club Fantasy's DFS Showdown slate video. We're covering all of the wild card games. I'm your host, Joshua Hudson. You can follow me at the One Hudsonian. He is Austin Amandolia at Austin_FFL. He's our DFS expert here at Club Fantasy. Austin, playoff football, baby. No better time to play DFS.
Yeah, no better time to watch one team get destroyed in the wild card weekend because we now have expanded and have 14 playoff teams.
And we just saw one team in particular on this game get destroyed by this same team just last week.
What a time to
round 2. Although it's actually round 3. But anyway, friendly reminder, Austin, tell the people how they can play these showdown slates against us.
Yes, we have a league on DraftKings. There's a link in the show description where you can join this league, play against us, other folks at Club Fantasy, other random DFS players, who some of which are pretty good, some of which maybe not so good. But regardless, it's a fun time. We will have contests for each game this weekend. That is 6 games. We also, because they just make themselves at this point, there's a contest for the Saturday games all together. There's a contest for all 3 Sunday games combined. So plenty of options. Come play with us. Come try and take our money.
And with that, if you got more money to spend, head over to trophysmack.com/WOFF. That's WOFF. You won your fantasy football championships. Now it's time to celebrate it. They've got championship belts, trophies, rings, wall smack to decorate your offices, hallways, kids' rooms. You name it, they got it. It's all customizable. Let's celebrate these wins and all of these achievements. trophysmack.com/WOFF. WOFS. Help us help women in sports. We are lucky enough to be able to send 4 amazing women to cover the Super Bowl this year. We'd like to be able to provide them with more than just passes. So using that direct link, trophysmack.com/WOFF. WOFF. Any and all commissions we earn from that, we're giving to the women that are going to these events. So let's help support women in sports. And from now until January 31st, add a championship ring to your cart with the purchase of a belt or trophy and get that ring for free. Just use promo code WOFF. WOFF. I got my free ring today. Did you? Okay, let's get into the showdown slate. Our first category here is Captain Chalk. These are the chalky captains that everybody is likely to pick because you know the name and they are that damn good. And Austin, let's start with, I want to say the front runner for MVP because he should be, because he's had the best season. Mr. Lamar Jackson.
Yes, he definitely, in my opinion, I'm with you. He should be the front runner for MVP. Even though the sports books disagree, Lamar Jackson, he's going to be the highest rostered player on this slate. I can't imagine not playing him. I could imagine not playing him at captain, but you should play him like definitely. He's going to be 90% rostered anyways. Might as well join the crowd. He's
at this point, if you don't include him, you're just like, you're giving somebody else money, I feel like, at this point. Like, you're just getting too cute.
Exactly. And if he doesn't score 20 to 30 fantasy points, then I will just have to admit that I know nothing about football at that point because it will shock me that much. He has been crushing it. This offense runs through him. He has been stellar on the ground. He's been incredible as a passer, which I think is why it's also particularly compelling to have him in the captain spot because he can sling the ball around to multiple pass catchers. And so honestly, he could have a 4 passing touchdown game, do it to 4 different receivers. And by doing so, none of those receivers are the optimal captain. but Lamar is. And so that is one way that I will be playing this matchup. I think it's totally fine to eat the chalk here, especially in those small contests.
Well, if you do want to get a little cute, let's talk about some alternates. These would be the Mutineers, your contrarian captain choices that offer some variety or some upside in some larger tournaments. Look, we know Lamar Jackson is good. What we also know is that there's a high likelihood his number one wide receiver, Zay Flowers, is out this week. So let's play a little next man up, and let's talk about former first-round pick Rashad Bateman.
Oh, boy, he was a first-round pick. I forget this.
He was, because he was that damn good at the University of Minnesota.
Oh, boy. This is, again, another sign. We don't know all that we think we know about the NFL draft. But Rashad Bateman, he had a significant uptick in volume last week when Zay Flowers went out. So he is clearly stepping into the next man up in that number one wide receiver role, very specifically the wide receiver role. And I think that there's a good chance he ends up being optimal. I think there's a chance that what happens too in these contests is that people see Zay Flowers either injured or potentially out. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play. And they say, okay, well, that means it's a Derrick Henry game, right? He's going to score 3 touchdowns, and they flock to him for the captain spot. And I think that's a fair way to play this. And I think you probably should play that in one of your lineups. But what if that's not the case? What if they just say, okay, literally, next man up, Rashad Bateman, your time to be the number one guy. Oh, we have 2 great tight ends that we can go to as well. And we have like weird, scrappy depth receivers that are sort of intriguing. They've popped at times. They've had explosive plays. Like there's a pathway very easily where this still ends up being a pass heavy attack, and Baltimore ends up coming on top. And Rashad Bateman, he ends with 7 catches and 2 touchdowns. Suddenly he's optimal, especially if Lamar Jackson doesn't score a rushing touchdown. Then it's going to be easier for Bateman to outscore Jackson than in the typical Jackson game where he's like really using his legs a lot. So I like looking at Rashad Bateman. I also think people just aren't going to love doing it because Rashad Bateman, frankly, gross name to pick because he hasn't historically hit the ceiling that people wanted him to, and people might be jaded. People are going to be more likely to play my other contrarian captain, who's still going to be contrarian, but less so than Rashad Bateman. It's Mark Andrews. And I think it's totally fair to go to Mark Andrews. He's been getting healthier, been getting more utilized in the offense. He's been getting a healthy volume of targets, even though there's been a little bit of disconnect between him and Jackson. There's been some misses here and there, a drop or 2 from Andrews, but they're going to continue building that chemistry as Andrews has worked his way back from injury. So I like attacking him. I don't often go to tight ends in my captain spot, but this is the situation where I would. He'll probably be like 10% rostered in the captain spot, I would expect, but I like going after it because he's also prone to get high volume.
Yeah, and the plus side here with Andrews, and I mean, if you really want to extend that even down to Isaiah Likely, anytime one of their top 2 wide receivers is out, they tend to run a lot more 12 personnel, which is going to put both Likely and Mark Andrews on the field, thus increasing their opportunities. Next section here is going to be the first mate. Because every captain needs a reliable crew, these are going to be the standouts that help maximize your lineups. We talked about him earlier. If Zay Flowers is out, heavy Derrick Henry week. So let's talk about what that looks like from a lineup perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, some of this is just the fact that like even if Lamar pops and he passes for 3 touchdowns, Derrick Henry could still have 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, like traditionally you would think if one of them is doing well, the other is not because you have a dual threat quarterback with a good running back. Usually those don't pair well or correlate together. I had them both in a dynasty league this year, and I did just fine. They did well together. They can both pop. They can both score 20-plus points in a game. And so even if you decide I'm putting Lamar Jackson in my captain spot, I think it's totally fine and fair to play Derrick Henry as well because he does every now and then score receiving touchdowns. So there's a potential stackability there, but also he can have a big game and Lamar can have a big game. So I wouldn't just say like I'm not playing Derrick Henry if I'm focusing on Lamar and the pass catchers. I think you just play both. You lean into it. I do think it's fine to have Derrick Henry in your captain spot, and I don't think he'll be like 90% rostered the way I think Lamar Jackson would be, but it'll probably be 80% rostered. And I think it's fine to like get a little different here and there. because he hasn't had like a 40-point game, right? Then he's had some like 15-point games where it's like, okay, well, for the salary he's at, 15 points is not really good. And so I can see not playing Derrick Henry. There's a rationale there, but I also wouldn't be afraid to do it, especially if I'm playing Lamar Jackson.
My favorite Derrick Henry stat from this whole season. The first player to rush for over 1,900 yards and not lead the NFL in rushing. That's a wild stat. Absolutely wild. But let's talk about a running back on the other side. And no, I'm not talking about Najee Harris. Let's talk about Jaylen Warren, because we have not yet talked about any Pittsburgh Steelers. The Ravens are favored by 8.5. They've lacked a lot of juice lately, but somebody who does have juice is Warren. So why do you like Warren here is to help kind of fill out your lineup?
Yeah, it's because DraftKings won't let you play 6 Ravens players.
I knew that was coming.
You can't do it. You have to pick one player from both teams. So I'm picking one player from Pittsburgh, and it's going to be either Jaylen Warren or Pat Freiermuth. We'll talk about Freiermuth in a minute. Jaylen Warren, I'm picking him as the running back here because he is more likely to have the pass catching volume. And because DraftKings is a PPR website, that's what you're going to want. Now, I did notice in this matchup that Najee Harris actually played that role a little bit. And when they were playing from behind, Harris got some of that pass game work and those dump offs. So it's worth considering Najee Harris as an alternative to Jaylen Warren. Like, it's a little bit of an ambiguous backfield. So you can kind of like experiment and just take a stand on either one and lean into that volatility. But for me, I'm going with Jaylen Warren because it seems more likely he would get the pass game volume. In his past 3 games, he has 2 games where he's gotten at least 5 catches. So that's pretty nice for DraftKings. And again, I am playing this and at least a couple of times as a Ravens onslaught. I'm going to have 5 Baltimore Ravens players and just 1 Steelers player, and I'm going with Jaylen Warren.
So I'm going to pose this really quick. It's not on the show sheet, but when you say, potentially going 5 Ravens, 1 Steeler, why not consider that 1 Steeler being kicker Chris Boswell? I know you're very much against kickers here, but I think that Boswell, Warren, Freiermuth, all kind of along that same sort of like salary range.
Yeah.
Might make sense.
I like that. If you do, especially if you are betting that Pittsburgh doesn't score a touchdown in this matchup.
I mean, we've literally seen it how many times this year?
Yeah, that's
rough. Just throwing that out there. Could be something to consider. Our next segment here is going to be the deck scrubbers. These are going to be the cheaper punt plays that can make a lineup based on one play limited opportunity. Let's stay on the Steelers side. You talked about there's really only 2 guys that you're interested in playing, one being Jaylen Warren. Here's your other one, Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Pat Freiermuth because I do think that as we've seen George Pickens miss time and come back not super good, has not played well, Pat Freiermuth has gotten a ton of targets. He's become like a volume hog at the tight end position for the Steelers, which has been really interesting to me, but also I think is warranted. Like, everybody knows he's a good tight end and a good pass catcher. He's good after the catch too, able to like get yards beyond yards after the catch, like not like Tyreek Hill levels by any means, but like he's going to get you a few more yards. He's not going to just go down when he catches the ball, which is good for a tight end. So I like him. I like the volume there. He also, because he's a tight end and because of the way they utilize him, he's liable to get touchdowns. So that's always favorable to me. And we've seen him perform really well in games. So I think on a single game, like, it's going to be between him, Warren. I like your idea of Chris Boswell for the player that I'm bringing back on the Pittsburgh side.
I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Typically, when one of the top 2 wide receivers for the Ravens is out, they tend to pivot and play a little bit more 12 personnel. So let's talk a little bit about Isaiah Likely and why he could be a cheaper option.
Yeah, I mean, first off, if you're not playing Mark Andrews, I think you should play Isaiah Likely because one of them I think are going to do well in this game. I also think both of them could do well in this game. And I could see few players deciding to play both tight ends because traditionally we think like 2 tight ends can't get there. And that's fair. Even when Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert were together in Philadelphia, it wasn't often that they both popped together. And that was one of the best like tight end duos we've seen in recent history. But I do think that in this case, Mark Andrews and Isaiah likely have the potential to be able to get there both in the same game to lesser degrees. Like, I don't think both are going to score 30 points each. That would be wild performances from the tight end. But if you're looking to fill out your bench and you need like a player who can score 15 points, I really like Isaiah Likely, and he's pretty cheap on the slate. So I would go with him, and I wouldn't worry about whether or not Andrews is already in my lineup.
One more time, you can play these Showdown slate lineups against us. Hit the direct link in the description, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcast network. Come play on DraftKings with us, and more than likely take our money because, you know, we are for the people. All right, our final segment, the Kraken. These are going to be the lineup traps that sink the ship. We haven't talked about the most obvious Steeler yet, so I think it's time to talk a little bit about George Pickens.
Yes. I will say I'm not playing him a lot, but I do think it's a mistake to not play him at least once. And the reason I say this is because nobody wants to play him. Everybody just watched this last game, or at least saw the Twitter feed of people talking and trashing George Pickens after this last game. And I think nobody's going to want to play him. Nobody's going to want to play him in the captain spot. So if you're playing in a super large field, I think it's worth leaning into that and picking George Pickens at least once, because if we have seen him have ceiling games, we've seen this Baltimore Ravens defense get got, which they've been better recently, but we've seen them get got against number one receivers. And so there is a world where George Pickens ends up having this significant upside. I don't think you should do it a lot. I wouldn't do it in every lineup. I would do it in like literally one lineup, but I think it's worth doing it at least once.
So staying on the Steelers side, Cordell Patterson makes the list because, you know, it's Arthur Smith and he likes a good rotation and he's got a thing for Cordell Patterson.
He does. And one of my best friends is a Steelers fan. So I end up watching a lot of these games. And once a game, Cordell Patterson comes out and lines up in the backfield. I'm like, what the heck are you doing, Arthur Smith? We've been here before. It's not going to work. I watched it last week. It didn't work then. It's not going to work now. You run the same play every time with Cordero Patterson. It goes nowhere. Do not play Cordero Patterson. Even though Arthur Smith likes him, he has no fantasy upside.
One last time, head over to trophysmack.com/WOFF, WOFF. Get all of your achievement-based needs and help us continue our efforts to support women in sports. He is Austin at Austin_FFL. I am Josh Hudson at the One Hudsonian. You, of course, can follow all that Club Fantasy does at Club Fantasy FFL. The URL, clubfantasyffl.com. Be sure to like this video over on YouTube, and more importantly, subscribe to the channel, because we're going to have Showdown Slate videos dropping all throughout the NFL playoffs, giving you a breakdown of the Showdown slates for every single playoff matchup. Stay tuned for the next video and all the videos throughout the NFL playoffs.